Shantae. Those are my grandparents behind you. Those are my grandparents.
Make sure that standing here, please scan the camera. For the welcome, am I good?
So where we going?
Good. I was a little bit nervous when I participated in like before. And I'm a student of doing the Vermont program.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So one of us would feel more anxiety, I guess, since COVID socially, but I'm excited to be here. To be chill. I definitely wasn't expecting to be happy.
Yeah.
That makes a difference.
She had sent an email on giving me a little bit of something to focus my thoughts on.
Yes, yeah. That's a false sometimes. It happens too.
Alright, y'all waiting for one more panelist, and also on the American Community Book Center, we're happy to study all Jarvis's book. In the meantime, the food is open. There's a number of small money. These photos have not taken off. Yes, dinner. Everything except fried chicken is vegan. So vegetarians, vegans on board.
Where do you want to sit, Mama Jim?
Where you want me to sit?
It's your choice.
My choice?
Ladies first, as they say.
Wait a minute. Hold up. Why you don't have anything? I couldn't be an actress. Ooh. 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 Why I did that?
Because this is your moment.
This mine. What the kids say? They say, oh, yeah. You already got people around. You already have one.
You want to sit next to Jarvis?
No, you want me to sit? Okay, I'll sit.
I'm happy.
Wherever you want.
I'm happy to. I just also.
Jarvis is out. Woo.
How do you know
You all right?
How much? Woo. Jarvis used to be with a writers guild called No More Literary Society. And that's it, no more.
Yes.
Not no more, but the
No more.
power of the word. That's what it was with Kalama Yasalam
Oh, yeah.
and all them people. Even Brown, Jericho.
Yeah.
Jericho Brown was in. And he,
Sandra Lane.
Cassandra, all of them were writers. Everybody that was there, they turned out to be writers.
Nadia, of course.
Nadia.
Maria.
Yeah. It was excellent. What they would do, they would go to each other's homes and they would talk.
Yeah.
Wee hours of the morning.
Mhm.
I didn't never go because I had to go to sleep. And they would and they would go wee hours in the morning
Yeah.
and they would talk and they would tell you, oh, you better not come up in there with no raggedy story. I have heard them tear people up. I mean, just rip them apart.
It's a raggedy story.
Raggedy stuff. What's this? What's the invitation? So anyway, you know, you can't go in there with a raggedy story.
Yeah.
And they'll tell you, you know, like if you finish the story and it's like crickets.
Mm.
I said, oh Jesus,
Here it comes.
here it comes. Kalama would be first. Oh baby, after Kalama, oh baby, what in the hell?
One of the comments you never wanted to hear from Kalama, like if you read a poem, he would say, now what makes that a poem?
Yeah, that's him. That would be him.
Got him.
And he just looked. You know, he had that look. You know,
And he didn't even say it to be mean. It was just, you know,
the
just a
truth.
question.
It was just the truth.
What makes that a poem?
Yes, indeed. It's just I love those
Yeah.
Fridays. Once a month. Was it once a month?
Yeah,
On a
at the
Friday.
bookstore, yeah.
Yeah, the last-
second Friday.
Second Friday, and they would come
Broad.
in and they would you know redo their story and rewrite it and everything. Some of them were, some of them. Oh, Carol, where she was from? The islands.
Carol Tancox.
Yeah, she ooh,
Yeah,
she was good.
From,
Where she was?
she was from, I think, Providence. You know, all the folks from Cape Verde.
Yeah.
ended up
Oh,
in-
okay. Yeah.
And
She was good.
either Rhode Island or Massachusetts. One of those northeast.
Yeah, she was. Huh? Yeah, give me a seat. You think I'm gonna come back down there? Shit, I'll come back down there. Y'all just, Hold this. Okay. Oh man, shit, this is. I'm gonna push that back. Oh Lord, I didn't know that doggone thing was that high. Wait a minute. Shit. Don't you fall about that shit. Oh, look at my baby. Talk about my baby working. Thank you, Naomi. That's my baby. That's my baby.
You want this water?
Ooh. From one extreme to the other. Y'all, I bet y'all won't invite me no more. Yeah. This is it. See, who told y'all to go ask Mama Kids to come in? Oh, Lord have
Like
mercy.
water?
I got my water.
Okay.
I do.
I think I moved.
You stole my water.
I didn't want the chair to knock
No,
out.
you know what? This is frozen. This is frozen. So I could pour it inside there. Have y'all started? Oh. Ooh.
You want to put it on the show, all right?
You can start with that.
You okay? Oh, no. Okay, y'all bless the food. Y'all, yeah, did you bless the food? You bless your food? Oh, that's not fair. You're supposed to bless everybody's food. You don't want nobody choking.
How's your family?
Oh, Lord have mercy. They're doing
How's
okay.
the grandson?
Oh, he's 7
Okay.
already. And he's old. He's an old man. You know, he's
You know, Naomi's
interested
an
in
old lady.
words. You know, I remember he actually said, I was telling him he was cleaning up when he was doing virtual.
Yeah.
So we cleaning up. He said, tell me what you want me to throw away. Because we always do. We have to, you know. He said, throw this away. He said, yeah, throw it away. I said, including this? He said, no, I don't want that done. He said, so way after a while, he said, including. What exactly does that mean? I said, well, you know what include means, you know. So when you put an ing on it, that becomes an adverb.
Yeah.
Well, so what's an adverb? I said, oh no, school, they ain't teaching out in school. It's cheeky.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, at least he's curious.
Yeah. So I bought him the word, what is it called? The memory jar?
Yeah.
In that little book to collect words.
Oh yeah, the little black boy who's collecting words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got
That's a
him.
great book.
Yeah, yeah. He likes that. Mm-hmm.
7. Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Time passed so fast.
Speaking of old children, when Naomi was at Wilcox.
Oh yeah. That's an old school. I used to do stories for Will Cox.
Yeah. What's her name? Miss Adams. She's passed away now, but she said Naomi was like everybody's auntie. So she started calling her T name. That was her nickname. T name, come here.
She was just an old soul. She your mom.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I used to do stories.
Okay. I bet that was fun.
That was fun because then I the teachers they were excited because then they could ask questions of the kids.
Yeah.
Total recall. That's what you need.
Yeah.
Recall. Oh, it feels good to me.
Yeah. So, what is the storm knock out the AC?
No.
It just
Age.
just. I got it.
Man.
Yeah, it's pretty warm in there.
Pretty warm. What part you was at? Part I was in, I was sweating. Oh Lord, ain't even election time. Speaking of which, wait a minute, where that chap you was talking about. Oh man, this was great. I had a good time with Tiara. Me and Tiara, she pumping me up, getting me ready for this tonight.
Yeah.
And so we just had a great time. Okay, good. All right.
When I decided to wear pants and long sleeves, it was based on the fact that the AC earlier was set to 75 and I was really cold. So, yeah, if there's any AC, it would be freezing.
Go next door. We'll stream you.
Oh my God. Of course. Oh.
I really don't, but yeah.
Mhm.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to keep this as brief as possible, but for those of you who don't know me, that's very few of you in this room right now. I am Megan. I am the executive director of One Book, One New Orleans. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Quickly, if you do not know One Book, we pick one book every year, hence the name. And we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we're going to grow stronger as a community through a shared reading experience. But when we do that, what we have to recognize is that approximately 1 in 4 adults in New Orleans struggles to access literacy and literacy resources. So we develop a curriculum around the book, and we give that curriculum and the book free of charge to adult education programs throughout the city. We also give that book to education programs in both adult and juvenile detention facilities. We give the book to the New Orleans Public Library. There are copies in every branch that we supply so that we can make sure that if you struggle with, having enough money to go to your local bookstore and buy a book, it's available in your neighborhood for free. We also give the book into the ears of the blind and print handicapped through a partnership with WRDH Reading Radio. And then to bring everyone together, we have a series of free family-friendly public events, like the one you're at tonight. And I just want to give a couple shout outs. We've got some board members in the room, Liz Elliott and Latoya Taylor. Shout out to our team members, Shelby and Rachel. And I just mentioned that we give out the book to education programs. Y'all, we got educators in the house tonight. We've got adult educators from YMCA Educational Services and their students. We also have the director of the Widows Upward Bound program right here.
Yeah.
Thank you, educators, for being here. We give them the books, but they do the real work to make sure those books serve the mission that we champion day after day after day. So thank you, educators. And what is that book this year? In case you don't know, it's I Feel to Believe by Jarvis DeBerry. Happy to sell you a copy. So one of the things that Jarvis wanted to do was talk to readers. And that's what we're doing tonight. We have a panel of readers from all walks of life. We've got a community activist, Josh Benitez. He works with Common Ground. Mama Jen from Community Book Center, an avid reader and book lover. We've got Jarvis himself. We've got Anaya. Tell me your last name because I learned it today. Gibson. Anaya Gibson. Y'all show her some love. She's a high school student from UNO's Upper Bound program. And last but not least, we've got Chelsea Shannon, who works with UNO Press, which published Jarvis's book.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to all y'all now.
I just want to thank all of you all for being out here tonight. Nothing pleases me more than to see people who are interested in conversations such as this. And thank you for reading the column, and thank you for your attendance here tonight. I don't remember exactly how we were supposed to start, so should I pass it to Chelsea?
Sure.
All right, I'll start.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just want to say on behalf of the press that we're so proud to publish Jarvis's book. I didn't have a lot to do with it personally myself, but I have read it twice at this point, and it's a really wonderful collection. So I guess for my first question, I was in the introduction from Jim Amos, the editor at the Times-Picayune, who hired you, Jarvis.
Yeah.
He recounts when he first approached you about becoming an editorial writer, and you said, I'm not interested in that because I don't think that writers who don't have the byline in the same way that I guess what other kind of journalists do, they get more of an ego boost from that. So you turned them down.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting because I would think that opinions writers and editorial writers get to put more of themselves into their pieces, into their journalism than other journalists do. So my question is, how did the way you put yourself into your writing as like a character change over the course of you writing your column?
Wow, that is a very, very good question. To your first point about being an editorial writer, I think my chief concern was, being anonymous, like nobody knowing when you read an editorial who the exact person was, who wrote that particular editorial. Secondly, when you're writing editorials for any publication, whether it's a newspaper or a website or a magazine, whatever the case may be, you are writing from the voice and the perspective of that particular publication. And it's not your personal opinion. It's not supposed to be your personal opinion. I liken it to being a clerk for a Supreme Court justice. You may have actually written the opinion, but your name is not going to be on it, right? So somebody's going to associate someone else with it. As for how things changed when I actually started writing columns, I had to grow into how much of myself I put into it. And at the same time, I realized at a certain point that just about all of my columns were beginning with beginning with me. And I was, at least initially, making every column, something about myself. And at a certain point, saying, I don't want to do that anymore. I have to do something beyond that. And so part of what I did was try to figure out how to write a column that was interesting to me and interesting to other people without it being about Jarvis himself. And so over the years, it became a little easier, I think, because the fact that I didn't have the word I in it did not mean that it wasn't about me. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't my perspective. But I think when you began that way and even filter it through yourself, you are kind of giving readers the signal that maybe this isn't about you, or maybe you don't see your way into this particular piece. And so it was always a balance between how much of myself do I share, but also at the same time getting used, and one never gets completely used to it, to the feeling of putting yourself out there so other people can make comments.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that necessarily in the comment section kind of way, but just in general. Mama Jan and I were just talking about weekly readings we used to have at Community Book Center when it was on Broad Street. No More Literary Society would meet second Fridays of every month to do a public reading. And there's a completely different thing than writing something that you read at your own table and then standing up in public and reading it before other people. Like once you do that, you are giving other people the opportunity to reject it, to accept it, to applaud it, to boo it. And so writing a column is the same way, that once I put my name to it, and often it was my picture ran with it too, it represented, okay, readers can do with this whatever they want to, and they can respond to me however they want to. But it's also always a balance. I would recommend people, even when they are starting personal columns or starting in that particular genre or whatever genre they're writing in, to try to figure out a way to say what you need to say without having to put yourself in the forefront, saying I was at this place or this thing happened to me and therefore this is what my opinion is. But to find another way to get into the story. Ananiah.
Yes. I actually had a question for you that I mentioned earlier, and it was if you had any advice. Oh, can y'all hear me better now? Yeah. Okay. It was, do you have any advice for aspiring writers? And also I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently in this collection that you would include in your next project if you were working on anything else?
The first thing I would suggest as far as advice is just read. I'm sure that's not the most original advice that you've ever gotten as a writer. but it's so important and it cannot be overstated. But not just read different writers, right? And not just, and I don't mean just different because their names are different. This is a different person, but read widely. Read people that people don't necessarily expect you to read. I would probably mention No More Literary Society many more times this night because they were such an influence. But one of the things that Kalamu Salam, who ran the workshop, made sure to do was to introduce the members of the workshop to people whose work we would never have encountered outside the workshop. So for example, one of my favorite books is The Shadow of the Sun by a Polish writer, Ryszard Kapuscinski. I would not have ever heard of this person if not for No More Literary Society. He became one of my favorites. What's the guy who wrote The Unbearable Lightness of Eden? Milan Kundera. You know, those were some of the people we read in the workshop that stretched me. It was I didn't know you could do with words what they were doing with words, right? And so you don't want to just go to people who are your favorites and assume that, oh, I have a favorite and I would have to veer outside this particular genre or this particular group of writers. Read broadly, read with curiosity, and read with the idea of figuring out how that person is doing what that person is doing. Because I think when you approach, and Josh and I kind of had similar conversations about this today, I think when you read with the idea of trying to figure out how did the person accomplish this, like how did this person pull this out, it becomes more than reading. It becomes, you know, you're looking at the craft and you're trying to study the craft and figure out the craft and what made it happen. I was actually going to pass to Josh because we were kind of having that kind of similar conversation outside, and then we'll go to Mama Jen.
Oh, yeah, that was.
Thank you.
That was my second question.
That was my wife, by the way. So, I think she's more interested in this answer. What would I have done differently in what I included in the collection, or what would I have done differently in what I might have written about?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. As for the collection itself, I want to give Abram Himmelstein and Kalamu Salam and Ayothi Yemi Robinson, who helped in the editing of the book. I want to give them credit for giving me free reign to make this book whatever I wanted it to be. And I think the original manuscript that I submitted to them was probably 50%, if not 75% longer. And so I went through it and thought that there were things that were too repetitive. And so I removed some columns because I figured, well, you kind of get what I think about this particular issue because you don't have to read all 4 or 5 columns that I wrote about that. There's not a whole lot I think that I would have done differently in compiling the collection itself because I made the choice that I did not necessarily want it to be a Jarvis's greatest hits kind of collection, as much as I wanted it to be, this is a story of New Orleans in a particular period in time. And so there were columns that were actually like real favorites of mine that were not necessarily focused on New Orleans. And I think that they necessarily belong in this particular conversation. As for what I would do differently, I think I will just talk about the column writing itself. I will quickly try to get out of that trap of filtering everything through myself, which I mentioned. I think it may have taken me too long to get there. And I would have tried to be even bolder than I was and to kind of question my own assumptions, to challenge myself even more. So one of the things I can look back at this column and say, yes, I think this fairly represents me and fairly represents and is a good representation of my work. But a writer is never satisfied. You know, there are times when I read this, I shouldn't say there are times, just about every time I open this book and look at a column, I find a sentence that I want to rewrite. Seriously. The last One Book New Orleans event we had a long discussion about a column I wrote when my house was torn down and how I was really trying to channel the blues in that particular column. But the very first couple of sentences of that, I said, ooh, I should have switched that word around. And so that word came first and that one came second, right? And so for the writer, you're always going to have those kinds of things. I wish I would have done that differently. I wish I would have changed that. But honestly, and this probably sounds vague and maybe so vague as to be unhelpful, is I wish I had been even bolder than I was. And sometimes the columns, I read them now and I wonder what I was afraid of, you know, and why I was afraid initially. And writing in general, as I see it, is an act of overcoming fear. The fear of one's own self, the fear of what one doesn't want to share to the public, the fear of what people are going to say about it when they read, the fear of being associated with that group and not that group, the fear of one's own reputation. There are so many different fears that go into writing anything. And so sometimes I think that I wasn't as brave as I could have been. And my challenge, even today, is writing, is like, how brave can I be? You know, was I brave enough? I rarely think I was brave enough. And I think that's how most writers should be. You shouldn't be so complacent to think that that you've arrived. It's always going to be a work in progress. So Josh, excuse me.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I'm going for her because she's a showstopper. So. Good closing. Yeah, so you were talking just now about a way to, you know, take yourself out of the writing and really like speak through a different voice. So, yeah, as an artist, musician, I often, you know, when I'm writing, I picture myself in a particular space, whether it's like second lining, or I imagine myself at a bar, or I imagine myself at a coffee shop, things like that. And I wanted to ask, when you were writing From the Streets to Yale, A Journey Beyond Imagination, I think this is actually a few questions. One is, you know, where were you? You know, in your mind, where were you? The next follow-up question would be, whose voice were you channeling? And then who were you speaking to? If you remember, or at least in this moment, who you feel like you were doing the, you know, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, first I want to clarify that when I mean don't start with I or this happened to me, I don't mean that I was taking myself out of it. What I meant was trying to welcome the reader in a way where the reader can see themselves in the particular column and doesn't say, oh, this is just Jarvis writing about himself again. Kalamu used to always, he attributed it to Amiri Baraka, and I don't think it was an necessarily accurate quote, but whatever you write is you writing it, right? Mm-hmm. And so whatever we write, we're going to be telling on ourselves. Whatever we write, we are putting ourselves out there. So I would never suggest that a writer take themselves out of what they're writing. Only that you don't have to be narcissistic about it, and you don't have to give the impression that this is all about me. Right now, I'm an editor for MSNBC.com, and one of the editing responses I have sometimes given our columnists is, we know this is an essay that you are writing. We got it because your name is at the top. But when you say, it seems to me that, ... or this strikes me as, or I feel this way, or I've long thought, then you are not being as welcoming to the reader as you could be. You know, you could just say it should appear to everybody. It should be obvious to everybody that the Secret Service was out of line, or whatever the case may be. By saying it seems to me that the Secret Service was out of line, then you're not really welcoming the reader into the conversation in the same way. So he's asking about Troy Simon. Troy Simon has one of the more remarkable stories that I ever encountered. In New Orleans, he was essentially functionally illiterate as a, I don't remember what grade he was, I think 8th or 9th grade, and he happens to be on his bicycle, on his way to the French Quarter, with the shoes he's gonna tap dance with on Decatur Street, flung over his shoulders, and he sees a teacher that he had when he was displaced in Houston. And this teacher decides to tutor him and just sets his life on this trajectory, like straight up into the atmosphere. And so he goes to Bard, the program here in New Orleans, and then goes to Bard College itself, if I'm remembering correctly, before going to Yale Divinity School. And one of the things that we talked about, Josh, outside, was the kind of difficulty he had fitting in at Yale, fitting in at Bard, fitting in at these, kind of, I shouldn't say kind of, these exclusive, majority white educational institutions, but at the same time the problem he now has fitting in at home when he comes back to New Orleans, and his vocabulary is not the vocabulary that he had before he went off to get this highfalutin education, one might call it. Where was I in my mind? That's an interesting question to ask. All over, I guess, from the Katrina story through all of the debates and fights about education and public education in the city, to all of the things that people say and don't say about Black boys and what their potential is in New Orleans. And also thinking about me and my relationship with my circle, with my family. Do I not fit in the way that I want to fit in because I have had kind of similar educational experiences as Troy? And so, again, one never takes oneself out of it, right? There's always going to be something that's coming from your heart, from your brain, from your opinions, from your thoughts. And but yeah, Troy's story to me was really remarkable. And what I hope the column accomplished was something that was not ideological. For example, Troy's teacher was, I think, a Teach for America teacher. And whatever one thinks about Teach for America, I know there are really some partisan divides about that. This person changed his life, and one could not argue against that. And so I wasn't trying to make an argument one way or the other for whether you agree with or don't agree with the presence of Teach for America in New Orleans, but I was trying to point out that this particular story was worthy of our attention. And so now I'm going to save, I think, the best for last. Not that this is the end or anything, but Mama Jen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And the whole book, when you talk all these different stories and scenarios, there were certain things in there that seemed as if you wanted to say, you wanted to use certain words, and some of it you did. Said like shaking it in the new New Orleans.
Yeah.
What is the new New Orleans? So right here, Sunday, talking about the same Al who had told me he wasn't leaving New Orleans, said he was about done with the whole state of Louisiana. He's leaving. Now that's the biggest lie told out here today, said a passerby named Frank. Frank asked Al where he'd been. Sick, Al answered, except he didn't say it that way. He said, man, I've been pronounced dead. Now, what were you saying? What was he saying when he said, man, I was pronounced dead? Because the whole book is about the breaching of the letters and the people.
Yeah.
You talked about the people more than you talked about yourself.
Yeah.
You talked about the people. And so you saw something leaving, like a different spirit, seemed like to me. I'm
Well, let me say, first of all, I think to your point, this book, I think, represents a transition from New Orleans to the new New Orleans. However you describe that newness, right? There was a New Orleans that existed before 2005, and now there's a New Orleans that's coming into being. And the particular column that she's referring to was written in April 2006. So we're less than a year out at this point. And I encountered the people in Treme, and I had lived in Treme until a year or so before the storm. So I encounter it was the house I had lived in that was now going for $495,000. And this is 2006. So it's inconceivable to me what it might go for right now. And again, this was a house, as I point out in the column, where I could look out my window and see a man who did not have any type of electrical hookups in his house and would keep his lights on using a car battery that was in his truck that was parked on Treme Street. And so to think that, okay, the house that I lived in that had a guy who was lighting his house with a car battery is now selling for $500,000 just 8 months after the storm was like, whoa, okay, we're in a different place now. Like this is not the same place that I knew. But also to your point, on a real literal and superficial level, having not grown up in New Orleans, I was always trying to keep my ears open to how people in New Orleans talk. And because for me, when you talk about being about the people of New Orleans, you can't write about the people of New Orleans without also going to the sound of people in New Orleans and how they have conversations and how it's not going to sound like a conversation that you would hear in Memphis or in Toledo or in Baltimore or in Miami. It's going to sound like you're in New Orleans. And so for somebody to ask Chief Al where you been, and he says, man, I've been pronounced dead. You know, that's more than how I've been sick, you know, or even I've been low sick, as they might say in Mississippi. But, you know, to your point, yeah, I think this book in general is about a city that has been pronounced dead, right? The city very, 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 very quickly. And this gets back to something I actually wrote as an editorial writer before the bulk of these columns began. Dennis Hastert, who was then the chief of, the House Speaker, U.S. House Speaker, you know, that same week of Katrina was saying, I don't know that New Orleans should be rebuilt again. I think we need to rethink, you know, what we do in New Orleans. And so, yes, you know, Chief Al, being Chief Al, was, you know, there is no one person who is representative of New Orleans. And I think That's a mistake that a lot of outside journalists have made. Oh, let me find a typical New Orleanian on the street. Well, which neighborhood was it typical to? You know, that will tell you a lot more than just saying somebody in New Orleans. But to see Al again, and again, I saw him the week after Hurricane Katrina, and I remember very, very quickly, very, very clearly, something he said. It has never, ever left me. It was the week after Katrina. There were still some holdouts in the city. The officials were telling everybody they had to evacuate. I'm walking through Treme. I encounter him, and I asked him, is he leaving? And he says, man, if I leave New Orleans, where the hell I'm going to be after that? And I never interpreted that as a question about where on a map he would be. I always interpreted it as, I don't know who I am outside this city. You know, where am I going to be in my mind? Like, where am I going to be in my heart? Like, how am I supposed to exist outside this place? And so for that same Al to say, I've been pronounced dead, yeah, I think it's, and you're helping me see some things that I didn't even see. And again, one of the things that good readers do, and there are a few readers better than Mama Jen in this city, right? When she reads something, she reads it, right? But for you to see that, you know, symbolism of Chief Al saying, I've been pronounced dead, when clearly he was still out there, you know, and clearly he was still moving, I think is, yeah, I mean, I think in that sense that he was a stand-in for New Orleans, a stand-in for that kind of defiant spirit. Like this whole neighborhood is changing around me, but I've been pronounced dead. Don't mean I am dead, but I'm still here. So yes,
I'm still here.
that was one of the original titles for the book, by the way. We went over and discussed it being called Still Here. Then at the exact moment when we were going forward with that title, everything fell apart at the Times-Picayune. So I didn't know physically where I was going to be. And so Still Here did not sound as good anymore. And I'm actually glad it happened the way that it did, because I think I Feel to Believe is a much stronger title, and a title that, again, because I listen to how people in New Orleans talk, you know, it just seemed to be the perfect title for this collection. I'll let whoever wants the mic next have it.
And one more question. I almost forgot. You know, when you were talking to the editor at MSNBC, and he said, it seems as if you're not talking to the whole people. But just like you said, you talk to the people, you listen to the people of New Orleans. And so therefore, if you listen to the people of New Orleans, naturally it's going to come out that you're talking to that certain people.
Yeah.
You know, and the first amendment. What's the First Amendment?
Congress can make no law establishing, or basically Congress can't tell you what you can and cannot say.
That's not you know that.
But that's part of it.
Yeah, you know that.
Yes.
No, that's not true.
Yes.
But yeah, you see everything is not unbalanced.
Yeah.
I see it's unbalanced. I think it's unbalanced. But I enjoy your column, as you can see. I enjoy your column. I think I even have a couple cut out.
And here's the thing: when Mama Jen tells you she likes something that she read, she's being honest, because she will tell you when she does not like it. So I take that as high praise.
There you go. You wanted to ask a question?
Thank you. Kind of piggybacking off of those comments, I wonder how your status as a transplant, who's now been here a long time, but how your status impacted your lens in terms of advantages, disadvantages, extra considerations, just what that meant for you.
Also, good question. One of the things that not being from New Orleans, I think, allows people to do is to notice things that might pass and notice of people who were born here. And I don't mean to suggest that, you know, being from New Orleans makes you better in any kind of way. But I do think that noticing things that are so common and so familiar to people who've been here is a real advantage for a person who's a writer, because you may find remarkable some things that people think is just completely and utterly ordinary, right? And so one of the things I think that New Orleanians, despite being immensely proud of their city, even in that immense pride, I don't think that New Orleanians are always aware of just how many ways the city is distinct and unique and irreplaceable, right? And so one of the things that, you know, not being from here, I think allowed me to do is see things that other people had long seen and kind of considered was not that, maybe not necessarily that important. But to your other question, I do not at all want to suggest that people were reflexively celebrating me as a columnist and said, "Oh, he's great. He writes great columns. Yay for Jarvis." That is not the way it happened, and honestly, that's not the way it should be. You know, a columnist should be challenged, should be held up to scrutiny. And so it was hard. It was really hard integrating myself into the life of New Orleans. And I had two inroads into actually becoming a real New Orleanian. The first was No More Literary Society with Columbia. And one of the things I liked about that group was that they didn't care if you were from New Orleans or not. They only cared about if you could write. If you couldn't write, you were going to be miserable because they're going to tell you about it the whole time. So you're going to have to get better, right? In order to stay there. And the other inroads into New Orleans was becoming a member of Christian Unity Baptist Church. And so it wasn't really until I was a part of both of those places that I felt that I had any standing to even call myself a New Orleanian. Until then, I was just, you know, this dude from Mississippi who had just arrived here. But other people are always going to have different opinions about whether you have a standing to say anything about New Orleans, or whether you have a standing to express an opinion about something that you didn't experience until you were an adult. And, you know, people have that right. If they think that, you know, I'm not qualified, you know, the columns are read voluntarily. There's no requirement that you have to read them or even agree with them. Mm-hmm. And so I've always hoped that they would serve as dialogues. And, you know, the point is never to make everybody like me or to win everybody as a fan, you know, but I do hope and did hope when I was writing the columns that the people of New Orleans could read them and at least believe that I had been fair and that I had been as observant as I needed to be, and that I didn't embarrass myself or embarrass the city. I'll tell you one story that really, really jumps out at me. The Washington Post had a story, I think it was 2006, that Mardi Gras in 2006. And a reporter from the Washington Post discovered Under the Bridge, right? And so there was this whole story about Mardi Gras under the bridge. And the person was writing about how it was not on any official calendar of the city and wrote it as if that was a symbol of the city's disrespect and the city's, I was like, when has it ever been on anybody's official calendar? It's just where people gather, right? And so they also interviewed, I think, Benny Pete from the Hot Eight, and they described him as being like really sad. So if you had read this story, you would have come to the belief that the Washington Post found about 10,000 really, really sad Black people standing under a bridge on Mardi Gras Day. And I was like, well, first of all, Benny Pete had just lost a band member, to a homicide, right? So perhaps he's grieving the loss of a bandmate. And secondly, the fact that it was not on any official list of activities by the city of New Orleans for Mardi Gras does not mean a thing, right? the people were there because they've always been there, and that's what it's going to be. But I didn't want to write a column that would be as embarrassing as that, and that would cause people to say, "What? Like, what are you doing?" Right? And so, the trick is to listen, to try to understand, to acknowledge what one doesn't know. And to try to figure out there. And I remember this was right before I left the Times-Picayune. There was obviously a really, really green reporter who wrote about the body of a homicide victim being found underneath the high-rise. And I'm reading the story like, how did they find a homicide victim underneath the high rise? And then I realized that she basically meant the elevated expressway above Claiborne Avenue, where she had turned the high rise. And I remember it was like 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I'm texting Esther, can you please change that? Because nobody in downtown New Orleans calls that part the high rise, right? But that's what that particular writer thought. And so the trick is to try to just listen and to be open and not embarrass themselves. Yes, there are people going to think that if you're not born in New Orleans, you'll never be a New Orleanian and you can't have a say in anybody's affairs in New Orleans. I get it, and I get why people might feel that way. But at the same time, I try to do my best to learn about the city as I was writing about it. And sometimes when you ask what I would have changed or what I would have done differently, I think there were some columns. I hope that I didn't include them in the book. I don't think I included them in the book. Some columns I wrote where I didn't know as much as I should have known about, and I made some assumptions that I shouldn't have made. And I went back and forth between whether to show a kind of growth in the collection of columns, right? I eventually landed on the belief that I should really make sure to include columns that I can still defend. Because I figured if I publish them in 2020, then people will assume that this is what I feel in 2020. And because I didn't have like footnotes and or like a red flag, I don't necessarily feel this way anymore. And I'm only including this to show an evolution. But there were columns I may have included just to show this is how Jarvis thought then, and this is how he thinks now. But I thought that was just a bit too risky. And if I wasn't there to explain it necessarily, then I might be causing more trouble for myself, if that makes sense. But back to you.
You were talking about how you wish you had been a little bit bolder, but I was thinking about how the very first sentence of the very first column, I mean, if you ask me, that's a pretty bold sentence to start with. So I just wanted to ask you, what made you start that column with such a sentence, and also what made you start the collection with that column?
Well, the second part is very easy to answer. It was the first column I ever wrote from Times-Picayune. And so because it was the first column, it was an easy choice for that. Wow, why did I? And I'm not worried about offending anybody. I am not a nigger is the very first sentence of the very first column. I thought it was attention grabbing.
It certainly is.
I thought it was a way to really grab the reader, and the job of the writer is to make sure you grab the reader's attention. some of the best advice I ever received on column writing came from Les Payne, who was a columnist for Newsday and one of the founders of the National Association of Black Journalists. But it was at one of those conventions that I went to a panel about opinion writing. And he said, this was his advice: even if a reader hates everything that you are saying, make sure they read every word. And so that to me was a kind of a guidepost, you know, and nothing pleased me more than getting an angry email, or, this sounds weird, I know, to be pleased by an angry email, but nothing pleased me more than getting an angry email or even an angry comment from somebody who was quoting from the end of my column. Because it meant, oh, well, you still read the whole thing, right? You may be mad, but you read it. And my point was for you to read it. And so you have to be bold. You have to take a risk. You have to take a gamble. You have to put yourself out there. And yeah, so it's the first column in the book because it was the first column that I ever wrote for the Times-Picayune. And I should say, I don't think I've ever said this publicly before, but there was an essay, a personal essay contest that I had participated in college, my college campus. And so I wrote about this particular incident, about walking up the street to a friend's house, encountering these kids who said this to me. And it was this whole long, like really how you think you're supposed to write a college essay kind of essay. And what strikes me about that is it was so long and ponderous and went on and on. And then I figured out, wow, I can essentially tell this story in just a few words, right? And so one of the things is, so this is obviously something that happened when I was 7, and at this point I'm 22. So it's obviously been on my mind for all of those years. But to answer your question about the boldness, there are two different kinds of boldness. I think there's the boldness of sharing information about oneself. That's a particular kind of boldness. But there is also a boldness that comes with telling other people something they don't want to hear, or maybe even telling somebody or saying something accusatory to someone else. And so when I talk about the boldness that I think I am still working on, and the boldness that I wish I had exhibited perhaps a bit more in the columns, was the boldness of telling other people what I thought they would have. I should say this, and this shaped the columns in a way that I couldn't go back and change. But when I first started writing columns, I was also an editorial writer. And there were all sorts of restrictions on what we were supposed to say or could not say as an editorial writer for the Times-Picayune. And our deliberations were supposed to be secret. We were not supposed to expose any divisions among the editorial board. And so the expectation was initially that I would not write anything that directly contradicted the positions of the Times-Picayune. That changed around 2012. And I had to unlearn how to ship out away from what were expected to be, to meet the approval of everybody else at the Times-Picayune, right? And so that was a transition that was kind of rocky at times, because I felt like, oh, I've had these kind of restrictions for so long, it's kind of difficult to understand how to write without them. But it's something that I was still pushing against and pushing away from when my tenure at the newspaper ended. Did you have a follow-up? It looked like you had something else to say.
Oh, no, not
Okay. Mama Jim.
Well, first of all, my hat is off to you, pushing away to not say, because that wouldn't be me. I know you read, Harlem Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And Carl Van Vechten, getting to that word. Remember, he wrote that book,
Yeah.
Nigga Heaven.
Yes.
But what it was saying inside was not the title. And his father said, you shouldn't use that. His father.
Yeah.
So if you know who Wallace Thurman is, Wallace Thurman wrote Infants of Spring. And if you read Infants of Spring, it's not the actual people, their name, but you could guess who he was talking about.
Yeah.
And Carl Van Vechten was up in there.
Yeah.
So he was a white boy that was in Harlem Renaissance era. So, but you did real well. We knew you were saying something, and we knew that you couldn't say it like you wanted to say it.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked about that First Amendment.
Yeah. Can I say something? It also goes back to Chelsea's, I think it was Chelsea's original question about the difference between being an editorial writer and a columnist. And this is something I probably still need to write because it was my experience for so long. It occurred to me that when I wrote an editorial for the Times-Picayune, that the reader would always, and for good reason, but always assume that the writer of that editorial was white. And that is a very awkward position to be in, to be a Black man writing things that the reader will assume has been written by a white man. And I really had to struggle sometimes not to say something in an editorial that I might say because I'm Black, but would be interpreted by the reader as having come from a white man and therefore have been offensive. Does that make sense to anybody?
Of course.
For example, I remember very clearly when Jim Haslett was coming on as the football coach for the Saints, and Ricky Williams, the star running back who had been drafted in Mike Ditka's era, was complaining about, I think he said about Jim Haslett, he didn't even ask me how my elbow was, because Ricky had an injury, right? And I encountered so many Black people blasting Ricky Williams, right? Calling him a baby, calling him a crybaby. He was whining, he was immature, he was acting like a little boy, whatever you want to say. I couldn't write any of that stuff, right? Because this is going to be perceived as not coming from a Black person. It's going to be perceived as coming from the man, right? And so one of the things that was really uncomfortable and remains uncomfortable, I don't know if I've said this out loud before, but I often had the opinion that I was going to work to become a white man, right? When I'm writing the editorials, right? Because whatever I write is going to be perceived as having come from the Times-Picayune's editorial page and thus white people, right? And so how that plays with one's sense of identity when one is writing is very, very complicated. And I haven't even unpacked it all. Yes. So the editorial, so going to a column from the editorial was, at least you can see me, you can see my face, you know who it is. It may cause you to hate me more, but at least you can see who is actually writing this, and you can home in on the actual author itself. But to your point, yeah, I had these restrictions at the very beginning that were a combination of me wanting to write columns, but knowing that I was never going to get to the place of writing columns, at least not at that point, unless I was an editorial writer. And so my major position was being an editorial writer, and the columns was kind of what I did off to the side, and then transitioning through the course of the book into a full-time columnist who is, I've said it before, who's becoming a New Orleanian, but also is becoming more comfortable with my own voice and being an individual and trying to step away from being exclusively associated with the institution with which I work, if that makes sense.
Much sense.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that first. That sounds super hard. I really can't
It
even
is,
imagine.
and it was. I mean, I hope you all can see and hear me, because yeah, imagine you writing something and people don't know that it's you, but not only don't know that it's you, assume that it's written by a person whose identity is vastly different from yours. And what that might do to how you make your word choices, what that might do to how forceful you are, to how funny you are, to all of those things. It's a real different, it's a unique kind of situation that I would suggest that only a few Black writers have ever encountered. Because, first of all, there are very, very few Black editorial writers in the country. But this idea of writing for an institution and not oneself is not a very common experience.
Yeah. So yeah, when you say that, I think about like all the different forms of like whitewashing. And one of the things that I think about as you're writing from that white informed voice, and like navigating like how difficult that was. What I would like to ask is, are there moments where in like being aware of this like white voice that people will hear, were there moments where you got to or found a space to like wield that like almost like illusion of privilege that readers would assume that you had, if that makes sense?
Well, let me say that one of the things I did notice was there were a few occasions when I wrote a column that was very, very similar to an editorial that I may have also written. And the difference in the responses, where me as a columnist got all the hate, but the editorial was like, people weren't that bothered by it, suggested that people's perception of the opinion was being filtered through their perceptions of me and me being a Black man. And there were so many times when I felt that so many readers weren't opposed to me, so many readers weren't opposed to my ideas as much as they were opposed to my existence, especially my existence in their newspaper, right? And so the fact that I had anything at all to say, or that I was being given a platform in which to say it, was the problem, way more than any particular opinion that I might have expressed. But to your question, yeah, there were several editorials that I wrote, and that were quickly followed by the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office or the St. Tammany council person or whomever locally doing something that we as an editorial board said that they should do. And I don't think, well, I shouldn't say I don't think, I know that response wouldn't have been the same if it had been just a personal column under my byline, right? The fact that it had the backing of the Times-Picayune itself, and Ashton Phelps, the publisher of the Times-Picayune, because he signed off on all of the editorials, gave it a weight that I myself, as an individual Black man, could never wield and could never have. But yeah, to your point, that's why I said that sometimes I felt like I was going to work to be a white man, because people would read the editorials and think, okay, well, Times-Picayune is saying this, and maybe I'm out of line, so I'm going to change this policy. Not knowing that I was the one who wrote that, right? And so they would never have given me or even assumed that that they never would have responded to me saying it if they knew that it was me saying it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I would just like to say, you got
Yeah.
I think we were also going to open it up to people in the audience if you had questions too, right?
Yes, that empty chair is not a mistake. If anyone has a question on that, would like to go up there and join the panel for a second, ask a question, come back down. That is everyone community.
I've likened this to a in real life comment section. So if you want to take the chair and say,
Here comes a question.
if y'all don't know who Stan Taylor is, you've never been to a lecture anywhere in the city of New Orleans because he's just about at every one of them. Don't get mad, Stan. And I always see. Stan, we were just saying if anybody had any questions, and then you walked in. So I know you did. I'm ready.
Why you asking me a question?
Thank you, Stan. No, seriously, if you all have any questions about any of the columns or anything.
I don't necessarily want to come up to the stage,
Oh,
but I am thinking about a few things.
yeah, please. They want you in the recording.
Well, one of the things that was coming to mind as you were giving us the image of going to work to be a white man, and then the comment on you got him, I immediately thought to what extent, you know? But I was thinking about Ruby from Lovecraft Country, where she put on that thin white woman's body. She had to enter in and out of herself to be perceived in the world. That was just tangential, running in my brain, but I was really struck by the titles in her brain, especially as someone who is deeply, for myself, deeply enmeshed in Black feminist and Black womanist thought, right? This movement from I think, therefore I am, to Lord's I feel, therefore I'm free, to this I feel to believe.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could speak to the title, to that movement from I think, therefore I am, to this I feel, that's so deeply enmeshed into Black feminist and Black feminist thought.
Like I said, I think we landed upon the perfect title. I don't know what happened. Okay. Like I said, I think we landed upon the perfect title. When I heard people saying I feel to believe, area to like squash those things together and to essentially equate the two, like and to see no distinction between what I feel and what I believe is to me just a remarkable turn of phrase. And that's why, again, this when I say that there are things that people
who are from New Orleans might not notice because they're from New Orleans. I think I Feel to Believe is one of those things, that, you may have heard it growing up so much that you did not pause to think about just what a beautiful, beautiful turn of phrase it is. And so, I wanted this column, this collection of columns to give you not just a sense of what I believe or the opinions that I hold, but also what I feel, and also what I feel about New Orleans. And, again, I can think of few phrases that better scream out New Orleans to me than I Feel to Believe. And so, yeah, I think the philosophy is there, but also the folksiness of it, have always, it's really jumped out at me as like being worthy of being talked about and acknowledged.
What do you think fills the space of normal literary society, both in the city today and then for you personally? Like, as you've grown as a writer, what today stands in that type of inspiration space?
You asked, your question about normal again was what?
What fills that space in the city? Because it's still.
Yeah. That's a good question. We don't meet regularly anymore. But I think the space is still there in a kind of, I don't want to say spiritual sense, but in the sense that we know each other exists, right? And we know that we had that thing. And so it's not something that it can ever be taken away. But other things also have served to root me to the city of New Orleans. Raising a child here, is a way that one becomes more fully integrated into community than before. I still am at the same church, so that still kind of roots me to the city. But one of the things that was so great about NOMO being my introduction to the city is that Kalamu is not just of New Orleans, he's also a student of New Orleans, a student in New Orleans, a student in and of Black New Orleans, and just a student of the world. And so when you take somebody who is simultaneously a voracious reader, is curious beyond measure, has traveled the world, and can see how New Orleans fits into the rest of the world and the rest of the diaspora in particular, then there's really no better way, at least for me, I didn't see a better way, to become a part of the city. I mentioned in the very, very first column that I write post-Katrina, that I remember, I would never forget, a Tuesday evening in Chemay, a second line is going by, and Kalamu doesn't just go out and say, hey, who is this for? No, he goes out, jumps into the crowd, goes about a half block, and then it asks him why he's not going to who we dancing for, right? Who this for, right? And he was the one who brought back the story that a homeless man had been found dead behind the funeral home. And so the people in the neighborhood said, well, we got to have a parade for him. And just to see that, to witness that, to be a part of that, where the people in the neighborhood were saying, just because you were homeless doesn't mean we didn't see you, doesn't mean you were forgotten, doesn't mean you're less than. We're going to have a party for you like we would have a party for anybody. Was just, to me, I couldn't think of a greater, more concentrated crash course into what it meant to be a New Orleanian. And to have people who were often writing about the city, not exclusively. We had science fiction writers, we had a whole bunch of different people writing different things, but we were all writing from the same space, and there was no way for New Orleans not to creep in. So it was, for me, just a remarkable, remarkable introduction. And then the church, which was not far away, is at Confine Claiborne, situated between or near and between two housing developments in the city, the Iberville and Lafitte. Was just another example. Like, this is not, upper crust New Orleans. This is not New Orleans society. These are a wide diversity of New Orleanians. And it made me feel like I could be a part of this city and I could be a part of this place and I could call it home.
In the column Thugs Take a Hacksaw to Our Spirits, I had noticed that you began with art, and I was like, okay, so he started to connect art with crime. So I was just interested in that and what made you connect crime with art, all things.
Well, the thieves made the connection for me. If you haven't read the column, this is about perhaps New Orleans' greatest artist, John Scott. He died. I can't remember the year. I know it was after Katrina. He had a studio out in the East that he shares with Ryan Bachet, who I think is still the director of the arts department at Xavier now. And Bachet goes into their studio and sees that it has been broken into. And if you don't know, John Scott worked in metals. There are several of the sculptures. There's one, I think, right there at Gentilly and St. Bernard, right? Got it. So his artwork is all around, and he worked in metals. And so this particular column was based on Ron Deshae's discovery that their studio had been ransacked, and that thieves had gone in with hacksaws and just carved up John Scott sculptures, and one assumes just sold them for scrap metal, right? So I mean, just the outrageousness of not recognizing how valuable what you are really looking at and judging it basically on its weight, and only its weight, was just so dispiriting and so depressing. And so I can't say I really made the connection myself. I mean, like I said, the thieves kind of made that connection for me.
Hi, what is the one expression that best describes your feeling after completing your work? And for the other panelists, what is your one expression that best describes your feeling after reading the work?
Nice.
That's a very good question. If the one feeling would probably be fear, because that's the one feeling I have after just about everything that I write. How will people receive this? Is this good? Is anybody going to like this? Is anybody going to buy this? Is anybody going to want to read it? And so, I want to stick to your question and by saying just one word. So I would say fear.
I'll find a better word. Okay, it's going to have to not be one word because I can't think of just one word. Oh, sorry. I can't think of just one word to describe, like how you said, readers shouldn't stick to reading one thing. I had never read a book like this. So this was an interesting experience to listen to all the different stories and listen to you tell them and have your own experiences in there. So I need some help. Can anybody find one word that can describe that eye-opening new experience? Say it one more time. Revelatory, okay. Okay, revelatory.
Invigorated.
I'm going to use your own words, one of the quotes, January 29, 2010. when you talk about volumes, this is what you be saying, huh? You know, looked like 10,000 people were standing round the burying ground. I didn't know I loved her till they let her down.
I appreciate that question a lot because I think about it and have thought about it a lot. The first time I ever read any of your work, Jarvis, my grandfather, who's right over there, he was making me read the newspaper, much against my will at the time. And you were writing about the New Orleans public school system, which I was in at the time. And I have a lot of words and feelings. If I were to simmer down to one single word, though, it would be represented, right? I've always felt like your writing was conversational, that you were talking to me, and it felt genuine and like you were truly sitting down, maybe with me at the bus stop, or maybe you were right there at the table while I was reading about how the public school system was functioning at the time, and to be honest, I was very angry when I was younger, and I felt like, like Jarvis, he knows what's up, and that was really profound. And so, yeah, represented is the word.
Questions from anybody else? I just want to say again that how to say this, am deeply honored that anybody anywhere has ever chosen to read me. Okay? That might sound like faux humility, but it's really not. It's the fact that someone would choose to pick up a newspaper, go to a website, and just give that 5 or 6 minutes of their time to say, okay, what does Jarvis have to say about this, is a real honor. And just about everybody writers may have all sorts of different desires and goals and dreams, but I think at a fundamental level, what every writer really, really wants is to be read. Just that's it. Like the fact that you, and all of you, not only have you all read me, but you all have actually come out, and joined us here tonight is more special than I can really convey with words, which is ironic since that's what we're talking about here tonight, me using words. But I just want to let you all know that if you have your favorite writers, columnists, whatever the case may be, poets, novelists, whatever, I can't stress to you how important it would be to them for you to just say, I really like what you wrote. Mm-hmm. Because to the extent that we are all afraid of failing as a writer, your little word of encouragement, however small, might be just that extra motivation they need to get through that particular day. Josh has just told you, but he was standing outside telling me that his grandfather told him to pick a columnist and he had to write in that person's style, and that he chose me. And that is more meaningful than I can really, really express. And I just want to say thank you, grandfather, for giving him that assignment. Thank you, Josh, for following through with it. And but to Anaya's question earlier, that's also a very good way to learn how to be a writer, to try to imitate what this person is doing, to say, okay, well, this person starts like this and ends like this, or gets to this middle. Let me see if I can do something similar. To be very clear, I'm not arguing for plagiarism here, okay? But I am suggesting that you can learn other people's styles and how they write and how they put things together, and can use that as a guide, really. I don't know how much more time Megan wants us to go on, and I'm not suggesting that this is like any type of final remarks or anything. I just want to say it now because it's on my heart. Just thank you. Just thank you for your years of leadership, your years of support, for your support of this particular book, for just reading in general, for engaging, for the emails, even for the pushback. Despite what your opinion might have been of the opinion section that was once on the website, and I have plenty of opinions about them, I always saw them as kind of a set of the most mean-spirited editors in the world, right? Who would jump on anything that I did wrong, any misspelling, any grammatical error, any logical fallacy, anything. Yeah, there was the racism and all that stuff added in too. But at the same time, even those really mean-spirited people helped me become a better writer, because I was doing everything I could to give them nothing, right? And when you're working to give somebody nothing, then it makes you more careful, and it keeps you on your toes more than you might otherwise be. So I just wanted to say those things before the moment passed.
But just before I leave, I see my baby over there with her paperwork, and I'm more than sure it's about Home Fest coming up this Saturday from 11 to 7. I can't give you any more particulars. Maybe she can. But thank you. Yeah, come support the people on the man with the word. Thank you, Jarvis. Thank you for giving us some real literary words. I'm saying thank you.
Marion on our Crowdcast platform. And in case you haven't found our Crowdcast platform, there is another interview that Jarvis did with Kalama a few months ago. So please, crowdcast.io. But Marion on our Crowdcast platform is asking how often you write for msnbc.com, because she's got her Google Assistant set to find you. So thank you.
How often do I write for msnbc.com? That's a very good question. I'm trying to figure that out myself. My main responsibility now is editing, and I am trying to keep to a schedule where I write at least every 2 weeks. I'm working on that because it seems, unfortunately now, that I am kind of pushing the writing to the back burner, and I want to make sure that I'm making it the priority it was before. But right now, you can just go to msnbc.com, go to the columnist page, and you can see everything I've written for the website there.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that question. Anybody else? This is what, ask me anything. Brooks. Is there another project in the works? I can't say right now that there's one that is deserving of the title of a project. There are always things that I'm thinking about. I really want to do a book of personal essays that are longer than column length essays, but I got so used to that kind of 800-word length that it's a little harder now to break out of that mold. But I'm trying to write some personal essays that are important to me, but wouldn't necessarily be things that I would have written as a column for a newspaper or a website. Yes.
Would you say are the writers, poets that have inspired you and moved you into power?
She's probably gonna say, "Why you mention my name?" But my wife, sitting right in front of you, Kelly Harris, is a poet. And what I admire about Kelly is her fearlessness and her never-ending willingness to experiment. Like she will experiment like at the drop of a hat. Like, well, I think I can do it this way, or I'm gonna put this to music, or I'm gonna, kind of turn this upside down. So I will start with Kelly. But some other writers, I mentioned Rizard Kapuscinski earlier. There was somebody that Kalamu at Noble Literary Society introduced us to. Milan Kundera, the short story writer from Czechoslovakia. And what I really admired about him, he had a storytelling style of like telling you up front what the story was, and then still keeping you entrenched in what the actual unfolding of the story. Right now, at this very moment, I'm reading Tiari Jones's book, Silver Sparrow. I read her novel, An American Marriage, last year. More recently, and part of this comes out of conversations with Kalamu, I've been on a John A. Williams kick. And back there can tell y'all everything you want to know about John A. Williams if you have questions for him. But he, I think, was a criminally underappreciated writer, novelist, who should be up there in the discussions with Richard Wright and Ralph Ellison and all of those others. Although he said that he didn't want to just be grouped with the Black novelists. But it was through Kalamu that I was inspired to read his book, Clifford's Blues, which is set at the Dachau concentration camp in Germany between 1933 and 1945. And the protagonist, Clifford, is a Black male gay pianist born in New Orleans in 1900 who finds himself in Dachau for the crime of being gay. And it was scary to read that book in 2022 because it is kind of it's so similar to what we're seeing today. First this group is being targeted, then that group is being targeted, then the next group is being targeted, then the next group is being targeted. So I can't say, as for inspiration itself, at the core, I would say Langston Hughes for his ability to say so much with so few words. If you buy a collection of Langston Hughes' short stories, Mama Jen, what's the story about the man who meets the woman on the street in New York, like at sundown? I can't remember. The story is probably 500, 600 words about these old lovers who cross paths on a street near Central Park as the street lights are coming on. And you read it, it's like, how did he tell such a story with so few words, right? And so, ironically, since I'm talking so long, Langston Hughes' brevity always comes out at me, and it's always something I'm trying to model. My wife will tell you I'm not brief when I talk, but I do try to be brief when I write. And so those are some of the people who have inspired me in general and are inspiring me right now. And here's Stan with the question. Say it again, Stan. Okay, I'll check it out. Last call for your questions, comments. If not, I will hand it to Megan. Thank y'all so much for being here, for reading, for supporting. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for being here, for being in community, for being in conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came out. I have 4 announcements. I will try to be brief. Number 1, Jarvis will be signing books, and if you don't have one, Mama Vera back there will sell you one. Number 2, thank you, Mama Vera, for being our partner in this event. Let me tell you what happened yesterday. Mama Vera called me and said the AC is out, but I've already arranged the space next door. If you guys have ever done events, you know that people do not call you with solutions, they call you with problems. So the fact that she called with a solution and not a problem is so above and beyond. Thank you so much, Mama Vera, for everything you do. Number 3, all y'all too skinny, and we've got more food. Please eat it. And number 4, if you'd like to continue the conversation in the community, the official after party is a few doors down at Whiskey and Sticks. Come have a drink. I'll talk to y'all soon. Oh, Mama Vera?
Good evening, everyone. Again, thank you for coming out. Without you, this would not have been the fantastic, successful event that it has been. Also, thanks to Megan and One Book, One New Orleans for creating this opportunity, Jarvis, for your continued work, and the panelists, everybody who participated, Mama Jen for being the brilliant genius, read everything person that she is. I just want to bring your attention to Home Fest, which is this Saturday on Bayou Road. This entire stretch here, the 24 and the 2500 block of Bayou Road, we will have talks, we will have music, we will have vendors, we will have book signings. Actually, Marty Dumas, our very own Marty Dumas, will be signing her brand new book, Wild Seed Witch, at Community Book Center. And it's an opportunity to celebrate the rich culture and heritage of Bayou Road, New Orleans, and the businesses that operate here on a daily basis. So we have flyers here. Please grab one. There's a QR code that you can share. We're asking that you post it and sign and share it with other people. It was originally scheduled July 4th weekend, and this is our rain date. So send up prayers and for sunshine and cool breezes. So thank y'all again. We have books available, and come back and see it. Oh, I want to give a special shout out to Brother Sergio Vasquez. Sergio is always on it with technology in terms of helping us to create Crowdcast, flyers, and all other forms of support that he can offer. So we truly appreciate all your support, Sergio. And though she's not here, I would also like to thank Gina Minor Allen, who is the author of It's a Wonderful Children's Book that Gina wrote and illustrated, which is on sale at Community Book Center. But Gina is also our MailChimp e-blast angel. So she makes sure that the message gets out. And today, with the mistake on the date,
she quickly corrected it. So we thank her for all of her time and dedication. So we appreciate y'all coming with me.